Welcome to the HMO Property Show. By investors, for investors. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing. Whether you're a seasoned investor, a new landlord, or just curious about property investing, this is the podcast for you. Sponsored by the Co-Living Collective, your trusted partner in creating vibrant and sustainable shared living experiences. Visit us at colivingcollective.com.au to learn more.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. Today I've got my very good friends and a return guest. Are you my first return guest? You may be.
On this show, really?
Yeah, it could be. It's Mr. Angad Singh and Mr. Adam Barry from Perth Property Developers. Okay. Gentlemen, how are we?
Good to be here. Very good.
Yes.
Good.
Am I a return guest as well?
You are a return guest in the booth, but we recorded the last podcast on the Perth Entrepreneurs podcast.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So I thought I'd get you both in today to talk about what's going on in the world, because development in Perth has been tricky over the last 12, 18 months, maybe 24 months.
6 years.
Yeah. To be
It's been
fair,
a roller coaster. You forget what it was like.
We had that long downturn, then all of a sudden we had the sharp spike, and it's caused different issues, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And as property developers, we need to find a different way to make money in a market, and you two have found a nice little niche which is going on at the minute, haven't you?
Yeah. We got some good stuff going on. So yeah, lots of fun.
So before we get into the nuts and bolts about what you're doing out there in the market and what's working in the market and what's not working in the market, I think it's important that the listeners find out a little bit more about who you are and what you do. Angad, we've already had you on, but give us another brief update, mate, of who you are and how you became a property developer.
Sure. Look, I think you guys can go back and listen to that other episode if you want to know a bit more. Very briefly, I started my career as a dentist, believe it or not. After graduating from the University of West Australia, very early on I knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial and in business. So a couple of years out, I started a dental practice, and I also bought my first development site, which was a set of 5 houses, where I demolished and built 5 houses, sold 3, and still actually hold 2 today. Made every mistake you can imagine. Very lucky to get through the deal overall, you would say. However, it turned out to be a good little project and really set me up to get started in the journey. After that, I guess, as I was doing more and more projects, I really fell in love with the construction side, especially design and construct, and we started a building company. That was really the pillar that helped us add value to real estate. And, as we grew further and further, I met this guy and we started partnering up and doing a lot more stuff together.
Yeah, I remember that. Nice.
Yeah.
And Adam, what about you? How did you become a property developer? Your background's a little bit different, isn't it?
Yeah. I've got a long lineage of property. My grandparents were in it.
Yeah.
My parents were in it. My father was a valuer. My mother was a real estate agent. So something I grew up with. They were doing little developments since I was probably about 8 or 9.
It's in the blood.
Yeah, in the blood. So I started working after uni. That had been around 2007. First full-time job in commercial work. Had a business degree and a computing degree. Started doing some deals on the side, just as a side hustle, make some money. I knew then that you weren't going to get too far just working a job if you wanted to build wealth.
Yeah.
Started doing some reno flips, and then realised there was good money. I started making more money out of that than I was in my day job. And it was pretty easy to decide, okay, time to move and set up my own full-time business.
Yeah.
That was in 2018. Very interesting year that year, because that's the year I met you guys.
Yep.
And I think you're all sort of setting up your businesses roughly around the same time.
Yeah.
So, and we joked about it earlier, but it's easy to forget that was a pretty tough year in terms of property. There was no growing market. It was a declining market. And the key was finding the niches that were stable. If we saw stability, we're pretty excited. So we'll talk about it later, but very different environment now. So started the business in 2018, met you guys in that year. Angad and I started partnering in different ways around then, and here we all are.
Yeah, it's been, when you're talking about that, it has been great. The three of us all been on a very similar journey, growing the businesses, all in the same industry, but collaborating and being friends instead of being against each other, isn't it? It's
we're blessed, I think, with this. You could say it's the industry, but I think just the community we have, that we can be friends, we can help each other out. A lot of us around the same age, a lot of us started our businesses around the same time, and here we are.
Yeah.
So,
One thing that you didn't point out, Adam, is what was your first job that you actually had?
Oh, yes, my very first job. Mum was very big in our family that you started working when you were legally allowed to work. So 14 and a half, you went and got a job. And there was a little tradition my older sister started, chicken treat apple cross. She'd work there on Canning Highway, just over Canning Bridge. It's still there. And that was my job. And I was working out the back. They wouldn't put me on the front counter because I wasn't a girl. And I had to clean the rotisseries and put my arm in grease and all sorts of things. So, if I have a tough day these days, sometimes I like to think back to that and think, well, it's not that bad, is it?
I think I got the venue for our next corporate lunch, mate. Treated apple cross.
I think it's important that people hear that part of the story, though, because we all start somewhere, don't we? We all leave school without the skills that we've acquired now. And over the time, we learn different things in the jobs that we get, which then make us better when we become our own business owners, property developers, and stuff like that.
Yeah, so, doing a job like that builds a bit of work ethic and gives you a bit of perspective on life. So
a bit of resilience as well.
Yeah.
To turn up and go again every day.
And get paid $5 an hour or what it was back then. So, yeah.
So what's Perth Property Developers then, and how did it come about? Because I know you had your own networking thing prior to that, and that's how I met Angad at, what was it called before?
I was actually running two groups. So there was Perth Property Meeting.
That's it, yeah.
And another one called Property Virtuoso. Right. And my friends were running Property Virtuoso. Well, it's a bit incestuous. So they were running Property Meeting, then they split off to run their own. Then I took over Property Meeting, and then they got busy with other things. They'd run it for 5 years, and they rang me up one day and said, we're going to shut the group down, but we thought you might want to take it over. And I said yes, because I like the network. And very lucky that I did, because I know for a fact that's how I met Angad and our good friend Zach. They walked into one of the meetings.
Yep.
I'm sure I remember you being in that meeting, not the property meeting. You did come to both. But
That's the one.
I came to the talk that Angad did, but I think I met you in Applecross.
Yeah, okay, that would have been the property meeting one. Yeah, so I was running networking meetings, meeting great people, and met Angad. And why don't you take over the story from here, actually?
Yeah, look, it just kind of took one step from there, right? Like we initially, so Perth Property Developers, after that presentation that we did, we got a lot of traction out of that in terms of growth of the business and got to meet great people. I actually met you at that first presentation. So the initial, I guess, version of Perth Property Developers came out of the end of year reflection from that year, where we were looking back and saying, what went well? What was the things that we really loved? What put some runs on the board? And that community, which was Adam's community at that time, is before we're friends, but we've only known each other a couple of months at this stage, right? So we weren't really working together. We just met a few times. But out of that reflection for myself, that's where the initial version of Perth Property Developers kind of was born. And so I told Adam, I think it was on New Year's Eve, right? I said, look, I think we should do this properly. And so we just started a Facebook group called Perth Property Developers. And the intention was just to create a place that property developers can come, hang out, get honest, good education, not be sold to every 5 seconds, and not really have anything to do there other than just to meet other great developers. Really what we were trying to build was a place that we wanted to hang out. And that's how Perth Property Developers started. From there, we started working together in a more commercial sense. Actually, it's a contractor-client relationship. So he was running syndicates at that time. Some of his investors were coming from those networking groups, and he was basically forming a small syndicate, buying a site, and executing a property development. And then he would engage us as the builder in those. And then over time, as Perth Property Developers grew, we said, you know what? Between us, we've got the skill sets, because you're great at capital raising, you're really great at identifying deals. We can run the design and construct, and then we can sell them at the end. So we started combining that, and Perth Property Developers became more like what it is now, which is kind of like a vertically integrated developer, right? We then grew and actually brought on two more partners, Zach and Steve, who you know. And Zach, he genius of a guy in terms of what he can do in terms of property. He loves getting his hands dirty. He's very good at it. He's very good at spotting bargains. He's a very good negotiator. And so he is really running a lot of the deals at the moment. And Steve, with his background in project management, is really handling a lot of the delivery side. So what Perth Property Developers is now is more like a vertically integrated property developer. We run syndicates. Through those syndicates, we buy property, deliver the deal, and profit at the end.
So there's actually 4 people in the partnership now.
Yeah,
that's right. Yep.
It's grown a bit.
Yes. So I talk a lot about partnerships and finding the right partner for the long-term success, because if you've all got the same skill set, then it's probably not going to work in the long term, is it? Probably not going to work in the short term, because you'll all clash like crazy. So you've got 4 different people to make this all work. How does everybody fit into the partnership, and what skill sets does everybody bring to the table?
Yeah, good. Really great question. This is something I'm very passionate about, because I've always been drawn to people and how teams work and how people succeed through teamwork, right? So let's understand how a team comes together. Now, as you said, skills is one of the elements, but to me, it's not the only element. It's somewhere down that list. When you're putting these people together, you need to make sure that not only do they have diverse skills, they also have diverse backgrounds, diverse ways of thinking, usually diverse in many other things, but very similar in terms of their values, their ethics, what they think is important in the world, what their ambitions and goals and visions are. So they've got to be aligned in a way. Diverse but aligned is maybe the way to think about it, right?
That's very important nuance. Yeah, I think generally people talk a lot about diversity at the moment and its importance, but there has to be some alignment. Otherwise, you end up pulling away and fighting.
So. Diverse but aligned.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's always this conundrum, right?
Yeah.
And you know, that is the challenge of teamwork. If you can come together and produce something that is greater than the sum of the parts, then the team is very effective. But often in teamwork, what happens is there's so much admin and so much other stuff that happens that you're actually less effective working together than you would be alone. And we've been through that, because you don't understand. Oh, you like to save files over here, and now I'm looking for a file, and it takes me a long time. Like these type of teething issues that you get. So personalities need to be different, backgrounds need to be different, skill sets need to be different, values need to be aligned, right? Values and vision need to be aligned, absolutely. So to your question, how do we fit in? Like you could broadly say, so my job in the business is growth, in whatever form that takes, right? Whether it's growth in people, growth in the business, growth in strategies, all of that. Now, that's not to say that I can do it myself, because obviously everyone contributes in their own way, and we almost have like a leadership council, you could say, where we disagree and commit on these important decisions that we're making. Zach, he handles a lot of the acquisitions at the moment, so he's essentially driving the strategies, he's running the design work with those and actually executing a lot of this on-site stuff. Steve is doing a lot of that project management, so that level above the construction delivery, he's handling that. And we're kind of still a bit dynamic because we're figuring it out a bit. And Adam handles a lot of the money, right? So all the capital raising, he's like the CFO of the business, and obviously with his market insights and everything else, he handles where are we deploying capital, both our own and our investors, right?
And we'll get on to your analytical brain and how you find deals, because you were finding deals in a time when nobody else could. So we will get on to that in a second. So in regards to the two of you two working together, because that's how the partnership was formed there, what did you see in each other to make you think this could potentially work?
Well, look, it's very interesting. So as Angad said before, we met through him coming to a networking group. We sat down. I remember we had coffee together after that first meeting, and just talking to each other, we realised pretty quickly that we had very complementary skills, which meant the other one's strengths covered the other one's weaknesses.
Perfect.
And we talked about how we went about finding deals, and it was really eye-opening, because with my background and my skills, I'm very, very market-driven. So I like to analyse a market, look for niches where there's margin, and then execute. And Angad at the time was approaching it very differently. He realised that delivery is a key part of deals, so we'd formed his own construction company, and that design is a great way to differentiate your product from others. So rather than thinking of houses just as commodities, which is something that's talked about as a lot, I remember we had a very great philosophical discussion about houses being one-off goods, and the fact that, it might be a townhouse in Victoria Park, say, but if I design my townhouse in a certain way with features that the market really loves, then I can charge a premium. Or at the very least, I'll get the sale, because this was a slow market at the time. I'll get the sale when others won't. It was very eye-opening, very exciting. I think we raced to the office and got the whiteboard out and mapped out how we drew deals. And it was very obvious. If we worked together, we would do a much better development than if we worked apart.
Wicked.
So that was probably the beginning. And I think that was very much from the business lens. And then we just, we're similar guys, similar values. We get along very well. We became friends very quickly. Just felt like a really good fit. I don't think there was that much, agonising over it. It just kind of evolved. We started working together and off it went.
Yeah. Maybe that's the other thing, right? Like, remember, before we partnered, we've been working together for 3.5, 4 years.
Yeah.
So it's not, you really need that experience working alongside someone as well.
Yeah. Yes.
And through difficult times as well.
Exactly.
That's when the market was difficult. The construction boom.
Yeah.
Lots of things going on there.
Yeah.
So that's probably that's probably the test of the relationship as well, wasn't it? Getting through that. You get through that, guys. You get through anything.
Anyone can be partners in easy times, right?
Yeah.
It's the hard times that count.
Yeah. Let's talk about the market then and what's been happening over the last 24 months since the building grants came out and just spiked the construction space.
Yep.
Adam, you said there that the way you analyse deals using the data is very different to how a lot of people do it. And you were still finding deals in that time in the market, weren't you? So let's look back over the last 24 months during that sort of real, let's call it bedlam, because that's kind of what it was, wasn't it? A lot of people trying to get stuff done, but a lot of stuff wasn't happening at the same time because there was bottlenecks everywhere. How were you finding deals then, and how has the market changed between then and now, and what are you seeing in the market now as the gaps?
Yeah, so let's maybe start with how we find deals. So one thing I'm a systems kind of guy, or I like analysing markets and finding niches, and then I can just repeat that niche. So when we go to buy, we're not doing anything too clever. We're not the best negotiators. We're not going direct to owners or anything like that. What we are good at doing is finding niches in the market that we can replicate. So if we go back about 2 years ago, or let's say around COVID, before the building crunch really hit, what we'd found had worked really well was what we call small, straightforward and simple developments. And we like to find a site with an existing rundown house, bit of land on the back. You could subdivide into 3 or 4, build on the back, single story or double story depending on the area, and then sell at the end. So that was probably an 18-month, 2-year project back then. That worked really well. It had worked really well pre-COVID because we're stacking strategies. So we're adding value through the renovation, through the subdivision and through the build. So we're getting enough margin to make it worth our while in what was a very slow market pre-COVID. And then execution was pretty straightforward. Building industry then maybe arguably had a bit of excess capacity. When I think back to it, if the builder said it was 6-month build, it'd be a 6-month build, and it wasn't too challenging. And so that worked really well for us. And then we hit this building crunch. And the interesting thing with that crunch is it felt to me like it was on us before we really even knew. So just to recap on where it started, because it does feel a bit like ancient history. Here we are in 2024. It all came about from the government grants for construction. So the federal government gave everyone $25,000 for a PPOR.
Yeah.
And the WA government did something pretty interesting. They decided to give everyone an additional $20,000, regardless of who you were. Foreign, citizen, company, individual, no worries. And there was also a $10,000 first homeowner grant if you built new. So there's up to $55,000 of cash on the table. Now, the median price was pretty low back then, and as a first home buyer, you could go to new estates and buy house and land packages for under $400,000. If there's $55,000 available, that's more than your 10% deposit, no stamp duty. If you had servicing, you had to buy. I mean, it'd be ridiculous to pass up that
It's
opportunity.
free money, wasn't it?
Yeah,
free entry into the property market.
Yeah.
And then that kicked off a surge of demand.
Yeah.
Now, remember, the building industry has also shrunk pre-COVID because there wasn't a lot of demand. Suddenly, there was record number of builds. So it's like you'd gone from the lowest to the high in,
like that.
It was literally weeks, wasn't it? They announced it. All the guys we knew who were first house and land salesmen, they're just hitting record months. And I think that what they do is 6 months of work and getting about 3 years of income for what they're used to.
But they probably had 3 years of work and 6 months of income before that, didn't they? Because it was very quiet times prior to that.
Very different market. Just changed like that. Yeah. And no one really, I don't think people understood, because, by the time someone goes through the process, I don't think people really understood what was coming after that.
Yeah, and look, I do remember clearly on the day that I heard about the grants, I think it was a Saturday, and I woke up on the Sunday, and I did a little brainstorm on whether it was opportunity or what was the opportunity, what was the threat. I actually came up with more threats than opportunities because I realised there's going to be a surge in demand and it's going to crunch the industry. What I didn't know was exactly how much it was going to crunch. Now, part of that was just experience. I hadn't traded through a crunch like what we had. And part of it was also, how do you forecast that? There's so many moving parts. No one knows how many contracts everyone signed up. No one really knows how many trades are available. Remember, mining was booming too. So that started pulling labour in different directions. Borders got shut for COVID. It was kind of like the perfect storm.
Crazy when you look back, really, wasn't it? How did we get through it?
Perfect storm, yeah.
So
many builders didn't.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
and
I think there was a stat that 2 builders went broke every day for like a year straight.
it was wild, man.
Big
like,
numbers.
I think a lot of builders did not get through.
Yeah, and they weren't bad builders. It's just how do you adjust to it? So what happened? Building timeframes at least doubled. Costs went up 80% from pre-COVID to peak. So a builder works on a fixed price contract with, what's the standard margin for a builder? About 20% gross?
Thereabouts.
And the input costs were going up in 2021 about 2% a month. So what would happen is we'd be ready to build. Starting Constructions would give us their firm price quote. We'd go off to the bank. Banks might take 2 months to turn it around and give us our approval. We'd come back and they'd say, oh, that's great. Cost has gone up 5%. And you'd be stuck in a loop. If you tried to go back to the bank to get another 5%, wasn't going to happen. So we had to figure out what we'd do. And, for us, we were fortunate. We had a builder who didn't go broke. So number one, that kept that going. And 2, we had a pretty safe strategy. Because we were renovating existing houses, we were able to sell those before we built and pay down a lot of debt, release a lot of equity. And then when we had these rises, we just pay that in cash.
Yeah.
But what happened is it started to extend our project timeframes. So 18-month, 2-year projects turned into 3 to 4 year projects. Now, our strategy's been good. We've invested in good areas. There's been market growth. The projects are very healthy from an annualised return basis. But that's a pretty long project. And that's not really what we signed up for when we started the projects from the investor's point of view. So it sort of started coming to a head around 2022 when we said, look, this hasn't cleared up yet. We thought we'd be able to see the end of the building crunch, but because there were so many moving parts, every time we forecast, it'll be freed up in 6 months. Freed up and when we got there, we'd say it again. And at the end of 2022, we realised we can't forecast this.
No idea what's going to happen.
And so it was time for a pivot. And so we always are looking at the market and we start to sense things. So at the core of what we're doing is we're looking for value. So there's a concept called value investing or fundamental investing. What's the concept?
Benjamin Graham, Warren Buffett School of Thought. The Intelligent Investor, if anyone wants to read up on that.
Yeah, so famous book, great book to read.
Yep.
Is a bit focused on shares, but it applies to any asset class. And we've always had a sense of value. So when we go to purchase, we want to be buying something where the price is less than what we see as the intrinsic value. Now, the intrinsic value might be with the value of the land, the value of the building, and I'll give some examples of this in a second. But through our execution, we can unlock that value, and that's how we create enough margin to be able to buy something, do the work, sell at the end. If we can find classes of assets that uniformly have this challenge, then we have another niche that we can jump into. And so what we settled on was renovations. And the reason for that was with all this chaos in the building market, the replacement value for dwellings was going through the roof. As we said, 80% cost increase from COVID till now. As we've also said, very hard to build. There's a point there where you could not engage the industry. I remember people asking me for recommendations for builders. I'd send them on to Angad. What were you saying? I don't even think you're saying 6 months. I think you're just saying no capacity.
Yeah.
Lots of builders were saying that, weren't they?
Yeah, and if you did find someone, it was still maybe 5-6 months. So you couldn't engage with the industry to build new, and you couldn't find trades. So people were very, very wary of anything that needed work. So if there was a house that wasn't livable on the market, needed a renovation, very little demand in people buying it. So that kept demand low. I wouldn't have said it suppressed prices. It's probably more that the market in Perth has been growing at a reasonable rate since COVID. 5% per annum kind of rate. So these houses were getting a bit left behind. And when we started looking into it, we realised, well, because we have teams of trades, we've got experience, we can buy and renovate and actually execute. And there's a fair bit of margin there because of this intrinsic value that's not being captured by the market. So we bought a site in late 2021 in Como. It was a duplex pair, needed a cosmetic renovation. We renovated those and made, what was it, about 20% profit on cost margin in the end. Really good return for a project. It took 15 months, so we were in and we were out.
Yeah, the return on capital was around 25% in about 15 months.
Yeah, so we work with investors who put cash into the project, so they got about 25% return in 15 months. So they were delighted with that because some of them were in other projects that were taking 3-4 years. Might have good annualised return, but you have to wait.
That liquidity.
Speed is king, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you can compound.
When you were talking about a project blowing up from 2 years to 4 years, the first thing I thought was like, how do you even calculate or factor in holding costs for double? Sometimes you might put 3 or 4 months in. There's a bit of a buffer.
But you just have no idea.
Twice as much is just a deal killer, isn't it?
Oh, we were fortunate for 2 reasons in that. Maybe 3. 1, we were in growth markets. 2, we could liquidate the existing houses, so we could get plenty of cash, so we weren't running out of cash.
Yeah.
And 3,
we had safe milestones, right? So, for example, if a subdivision gets delayed, you're not incurring all of the holding costs of the build during that period. So, the places where the delays happened were not as dangerous as might happen if, let's just say, you got stuck at lockup or you got stuck at when you've already incurred a significant amount of build cost. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there was a bit of that as well.
And also, the renovation cost, maybe it's $100,000 budget. So let's say that went up 80% as well. 80 grand cop versus for the new builds, if they were sort of $400,000 builds and they went to 500,000,
there's 3 of them. Yeah, it's a big difference.
Yeah, big difference. Yeah. So that sheltered us a bit too.
Yeah.
And it was another reason why we started looking into renovations. So we bought one in end of 21, 15-month time frame. So we sold at the beginning of 2023, and that really proved the concept. And then last year we went on a bit of a buying spree, buying more properties to renovate and sell. So we bought 4 more since then, and we're still on our buying spree and we're still going hard. So we'll keep working on this while the opportunity's there. And I think we've got at least 6 more months before things change, because it's still very hard to buy an unlivable house. Maybe the trades are freed up, but how do you finance it? And where do you live while you're doing the work? So we know the rental market is just crushed. You're probably Perth's best hope with your HMOs.
Try my best.
And even then, I doubt you've got much vacancy. And so you can't rent. And can you afford to hold your existing house and your new house? Well, that gets very hard with all the interest rate rises we've had. Yeah. So, and we know some of that will play out over the year. The interest rates, there's a lot of evidence to say they will start coming down in the second half of the year. So maybe it'll free up, but we've got a good platform, a good window of opportunity between now and then.
Yeah. So the renovations that you do in there, are they cosmetic, are they structural, are you putting extensions on these things? Because 25% profit and cost, that I remember the days where we were getting 15% on a 3-unit townhouse development, and then you're doing a renovation and getting more in a shorter period of time.
Yep.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's probably like a few different factors that have come together for this. And remember, the market for houses is not the same as the market for builders. So there's like the markets are not perfectly aligned. So frankly, what you're seeing is that if you go and buy a dilapidated house, you are buying that at a bargain price, because your replacement cost compared to what it was 2 years ago, to rebuild the parts of the house that are useful have now gone up maybe double what they were 2 years ago. But the market hasn't priced that in yet. So what it actually is, and it will.
But it hasn't been able to, because
right?
demand blocking the people from buying the houses. So the factors I talked about.
Like, you see what we're buying these things for, and we're getting the buildings for free. Now, a building that would have cost 200K that we would normally get for free gets 200K, but that building now is worth 400K, and the market has just not recognised that. That's why we're getting these enormous margins in these renovations. Now, obviously, so what if you buy this deal? If you can't execute, you're stuck. right? So it's not so easy to find a builder that's going to do a renovation, especially not of this scale. Now we're talking renovations that are in the range of $300,000 to $600,000 in a house, right? So they might be cosmetic sometimes. Generally, they tend to be structural with an extension, and we're trying to create a refurbished character house, right? So because they're already scarce and desirable in the locations that we are.
Kind of like the one I live in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example.
Kensington is a great
And
suburb.
mate,
for
if,
the
if your neighbour wants to sell, you let us know.
I'm already approaching it.
Tell them we'll offer more.
But you look at the deals that we're buying. So we bought this just in November. We settled this. It's an old church in Wembley. Have I told you?
You did tell me about this, and I was
this
like,
is
"Oh,
phenomenal.
interesting."
This is phenomenal. So for those of you that are from Perth, you understand Wembley. It's in the Shenton College School Zone, which, if you don't know, is the best school in Perth.
Public school.
Best public school in Perth. That's where I went to school, by the way. It's in the western suburbs between the river and the ocean. So premium area, premium pocket. And we got this church, which is like a 2-story structure on it, beautiful facade, not even that run down, right?
No.
And another massive house, like another hall at the back, which is 200 and something square meters. All the structures there, you just fit it out as a house and it's done, right? So you've got these 2 structures on there. You've got 950 square meters of land, which in Wembley is probably worth about $2 million by itself.
Yeah, easy.
And you've got this brilliant structure, and we're buying the whole thing for 1.8, right? At least 600,000. My estimate, at least $600,000 of replacement value is given to us for free in this deal, and the reason is because no one can. Very hard to manage this. It's a church, so lenders are not interested. So a mum and dad can't even buy this, even if they want to. There's no commercial tenant, and there's no commercial asset for this. So there's all these like issues with these things, which to us are neither here nor there. It's business as usual. We do this every day.
Yeah.
So really, what's driving all this value is the fact that we're buying really great assets and we're executing well, and then we're just picking up the arbitrage, right?
So what's the plans with the church then? What's the end outcome that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so we're so excited about this. And, pictures would say 1,000 words, but we don't have that, so I'll do my best. So we mentioned there's the 2 dwellings. Well, this is a subdividable site, so we can subdivide into 2. So the church and the hall are 2 separate dwellings.
With no construction work needed, just straight subdivision.
Straight subdivision.
There might be a minor firewall, but
a bit of compliance work for the fire rating,
Yeah.
but no major dramas because they are adjoined.
Yeah.
But then what people love in Wembley are family-sized houses. It's a family area. It has one of the best primary schools in the suburb as well, Wembley Primary, and then, as Angad said, the Shenton College catchment. So families love to move in. There is a shortage of family homes. Well, just a massive shortage of homes everywhere, but
especially in these premium areas.
The agents in them areas are saying people want to move and they've got cash to move, but they just know where to move to.
Yeah. And look, if you search Wembley right now and just filtered out what was under offer, I'd be surprised if there wasn't. There might be 2 dozen properties max. So, real shortage of houses. And what is beautiful in Wembley is the number of character houses and the quiet streets. And when people buy character houses and extend them and create family-sized houses, they're just lovely, they're scarce, and that's what people really crave. And so we're going to do that with the church and the hall. Yeah. So it might sound funny, okay, a church to a house, but if you think about the fundamentals of what when we say a character house, what is character? To me, it's interesting architectural design, high ceilings, floorboards, and solid materials. So you're buying a really good dwelling that's survived for 100 years already and has hundreds of more years to go. So that's the shell that we bought, and then it's about fitting it out well and creating good functional houses. So the hall becomes a single level 4x2. The church becomes a 2-level 5x2. Is that what we're looking at?
We've got so much space. We're still deciding.
Squeeze a few more en-suites in there, boys. You can hear the noise.
Get the HMO crew in.
Yeah. No, good.
Beauty.
Yeah, but these that's where the value is being driven from. It's because we're able to buy. The market is not priced in accurately what we believe.
I was going to say, right? Do you think it was undervalued to start with when you purchased it?
100%.
You're making money when you buy, right?
And not from the church's point of view. Yeah. We didn't rip so the church itself sold the church, but I think they got a good price for where the market was. It's not like as I said earlier, we didn't negotiate hard. That's not what this is about. It's about spotting a market inefficiency. And to me, that's a real key with everything you do in property development. Real estate is an inefficient market for a couple of reasons. It's very illiquid, fairly illiquid, so hard to transact. It's malleable. So we're talking about unrenovated houses to renovated. Well, that's going to cost quite a bit and require work. And it's emotionally driven. Owner-occupiers buy with emotion. It's interesting. All three of us have either built or bought PPORs recently, and I'm sure you guys experienced what I experienced. That yes, I want to make some profit because I'm a professional, but when my wife wants certain things in the house that are going to make it a nicer house, then it's actually, I can't argue, and it's fair enough because that's
going to meet in the middle.
We bought well, but the key here is the value in the buyer's eyes or the seller's eyes. So the church got a good price for the church. We got a great price as a buyer who knows and has the ability to execute. And then the seller at the buyer at the end, when we sell, they're going to get lovely family homes. Whoever buys that church is getting a one-off iconic dwelling. It's just not going to be anything like this in Wembley. It could very well be known as you live in the church. So that excites us from the quality of the product we can make, the price that we might be able to achieve, and also just thinking about who gets to buy it and the life they get to enjoy. So
I like when the Perth Property Developers seminars or get-togethers are on, you used to start off by saying you guys are the people that are going to change the landscape of Perth, so we want to make sure that you're doing it right and you're doing it correctly. And just saying there, like, someone is going to live in that church,
absolutely,
and grow a family there, and all sorts of experiences in them as well. So it wasn't until you said that I was like, shit, this is a bit more serious than just building a house and selling it.
Absolutely.
Like we're going to make sure that these things are right for the people that are living for the long term. Right?
And that's how you do best as a developer as well, right? And it's worth mentioning, like, the church we're talking about the church because the church is super interesting and unusual, but the church is one of 5 that we've purchased that are similar in similar areas. So Claremont, Mount Hawthorns, etc.
Premium suburbs.
Dilapidated properties. It's too expensive for someone to buy and live in their existing house whilst they're fixing it. All of the factors that we've spoken about are coming together, and it's creating this effect in the market. And if we tell people this is what we think it's worth,
it's probably worth
they
more,
think we're crazy. Well, it's worth more to us, but we're usually buying these on the market, so we're paying more than anyone else is paying. We actually one of the properties that we bought, we paid, which was Dunedin. What did we pay for Dunedin? $1,050,000, I think.
$1,006.
$1,006,000. Okay. So
I'm sorry behind that.
we paid $1,006,000 for this dilapidated house in Mount Hawthorn, and this was in maybe June.
No, offer would have been around late Feb, March last year.
And settlement was... Dunedin was first, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So probably March settlement, you can say. And when was the one that was almost exactly the same but slightly inferior, just a few weeks ago, went under offer for 1.3.
Wow.
Right? So you can see that on this same street, inferior property, closer to the main road, inferior in basically every way. We were the best bidder at $1,006,000.
And we had competition.
Right.
That's how the $6 came about.
But we saw value. We saw value. We're like, look, this market, there's no supply. All of the things that we've just been speaking about, we're seeing what these renovated houses, how much demand, like 30, 40, 50 groups come through, even in the slow market, right? It's that type of area. And so when we're looking at this, we're seeing what's available. We're happy to be the highest bidder, right? We're not going to negotiate over $50,000 or $20,000 when there's this much upside.
Yeah.
But then you see it, like, yes, you might look like you're maybe a bit, maybe an idiot in March paying over when maybe the next best offer was in the 950 or whatever it was, compared to now where the same property is just sold for 1.3. That's a 30% increase.
Yeah.
Right?
It's $294,000.
Yeah. There you go.
No, it was $1,006,000.
Oh, and 6.
Yeah. Telling the story.
Okay.
So
we put an offer in, and there was another offer from a East Coast investor, Sydney architect. And this guy started going hard because he had money, and I guess from Sydney to Perth.
People, haven't they?
Well, yeah, under $1 million seems cheap. And so there was back and forward, and the agent got to a point where he just called, okay, best and final offers. And we were at around the high 900s at that point.
Where did it start?
He's, I think, around 950.
Right.
So it had gone up a bit. But again, we could see the value here. So we weren't feeling that we were losing by paying 50 more. We just wanted to make sure we won. And we were around that high 900s. So jumping to $1 million, we knew was a psychological. There's always a barrier when you go to that. So, yeah, you have to, when you're putting your final offer, when we're talking about what we're doing, we've got a huge margin, but we don't want to pay $100,000 more. Yep. Otherwise, we've trimmed our profits. So there is a line, right? And it can be quite agonizing because if I'd missed out, of course I would have paid the extra 10. So, you know, we did have to think a little bit about the psychology here. So we knew $1 million was a barrier. And then I thought, well, whenever we get to round numbers like that, I always like to offer a little bit more, just so if they offer $1 million, we win, you know. And I thought, okay, I can do $1 million and $1,000. But then I thought, what if they figure that out too? Okay, $1 million and $5,000. Okay, $1 million and $6,000. No one will think of that. So we've been negotiating. It was a Tuesday. Been going on for a few days. This is late at night at like 11 p.m. So I write it up and send it off, and something felt a bit funny. I double-checked and triple-checked. Anyway, next day it's accepted. I'm really happy. And I tell the guys, and then I happened to check the offer again and realised instead of 6,000, I'd got my zeros mixed up and put the 6 at the end, so it was $1,006,000. Right. So yeah, I inadvertently saved everyone $5,994.
That's a trip to Bali, mate. Yeah.
Just before we get into what we want to talk about next, the feasibility for the church, what's that looking like? Profit and cost?
Oh, Adam.
With just as the estimate, because you know the market's changing.
It's sitting around the high teens in terms of profit and cost.
Yeah.
What's very interesting when you go to do a project like this is one thing we maybe didn't talk about in the buy price is it is very hard to estimate the value of something like that.
Yeah.
Which is probably something that helped us.
Nothing to compare it with.
Now, how do you compare the end sale price? So for the hall, that feels more like a 4x2 house, a single story, when we've renovated it. But it's a rear house. There is no rear character house in Wembley. It's just not what happened back then. You built one house and one block 100 years ago. So, you know, we knew that if it was a character house street front, it'd sell for around 2.5 million. And we just discounted it. We looked at older houses that didn't have good character features, saw where they sold, put a bit of a discount. So we forecast about 2.2 million for that one. For the church, it got a bit tricky. And looking back on it, it's funny to say hindsight because the market is moving quickly, it's growing. You know, a few months later, I actually feel like I was maybe a little bit silly. I got out of hand. I'm a conservative person by nature. And for that one, I just said, look, we don't know what impact the church has, whether it's positive or negative character, which is wrong. We do know it's positive character. That's probably where I made a flaw. But, you know, we thought if we do conservative and it works, we're fine. So then I said, okay, where are houses selling that don't have a lot of character? Where are they sitting? And kind of pegged them off that weren't fully renovated. We ended up with 2 million as the number. But that's just silly because if it's a renovated house with potentially 5 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 200 square metres of living, it'll be above the 2.5. So yeah, we've got a good margin, but we've been very conservative. So we're quite excited to let's go ahead and execute. We're in the deal now. We don't have to speculate, and then we'll see where we're up to.
That's a high teens profit on cost with a 2.2 and a 2 million sale price, right?
Yeah. We plugged in 2.5 and 2.5.
This will be,
and that probably still conservative.
30s, right?
What is that? An extra 300, extra 800,000 in profit. That might be double.
Yeah. Could be. It could be wacky.
Where's the project at the minute? Is it the completion? Planning.
Yeah, we only settled around Christmas. So going through planning. Then if all
we'll do a
goes
case
well,
study on
expecting any pushbacks from council?
No, very straightforward.
No, we've got an experienced town planning consultants working on it. They have experience with heritage. There is a Category 3 heritage listing on it, which for those who don't know, heritage listings is one of the lower categories. You can actually apply to knock it down. So they're not saying you have to keep it. We'd never do that. It's
waste.
After you've just bought it. Because you pay to buy it, you pay to knock it down, you pay to rebuild it. Ridiculous, you know. So we don't see any major issues with that. But with all planning, there might be a little bit back and forward till we get to the right solution, and then we'll go from there.
They did have a planning approval to subdivide it and build 2 or 3 townhouses on the back. So keep the church and build 2 at the back.
Yeah.
But we're just keeping the whole structure. So if they've gotten that through, this is less of an impact than that. So no, I don't foresee any issues whatsoever.
Really? So with
touch the table. You never know. We're planning. Councils change.
Neil, you won't believe this. What happened with this flag? This is true.
So with the renovations going so well, are you still looking for development sites as well, or is the full focus just on that at the minute? Are you finding anything else that's stacking up?
No, there's another factor I actually forgot to mention that's very important in the development environment over the last, really it's been about 3 to 4 years. So the planning code in Perth is changing. Have you had anyone on the podcast talk about that?
We did prior to it getting shelved, and now it's back.
So a quick recap for everyone who might not be aware of it. It was about 2.5 years of development to redo the planning code for what is referred to as medium density, which is R30 through to R60. It got announced that it was happening around April last year, and there was a 3-month transition. It was gazetted, which usually means it's locked in, and it was going to start 1st of September 2023. About 2 weeks before that date, the Planning Minister, Housing Minister John Kerry turned around and said, no, we're deferring it. And I think it was a very wise move because he listened to feedback from industry, and this was going to really mess up new housing estates. What are the challenges with the code? And I might sound like I'm very anti the code as a developer. The code is the code. I just have to adjust. Some people are very passionate about this code. One challenge it presents is that it has a few factors around green space, which is quite important. But some of these, in my opinion, are a little bit impractical, and they restrict the building envelope in favour of garden space. That means in a lot of R30, R40 zonings where you used to be able to do single storey, you're forced to build 2-storey. So what does that mean as an impact? Well, single storey house at the moment might cost, say, $350. The same functional internal space might cost $500.
In double story.
The double story. Now, the end sale price, probably similar because it's the same functional space.
So it costs you more to develop, but it's not worth it.
It costs your margin.
Yeah.
Now,
plus all your designs have to be redone. It's like a big until there's certainty around what's going to be approved, it's been really tough to really lean into medium density new builds, you know.
And this is all to get a tree in the back garden.
Well, it wasn't the tree. The tree controls were good. It was actually just nebulous garden green space.
This is the most stringent requirement of any capital city possibly in the world for green space.
I think Melbourne's similar. I think they base it off them.
I think I was speaking to Bianca about this, and she said we're the only capital city that expects trees to be on private property, whereas every other city would have the trees, but they'd be on public property, right? So what they're doing is they're basically they're putting the onus of green space back onto the homeowner instead of trying to keep it in the council. That's why we're having these issues. That's where the tension is, and we haven't found that balance yet.
So long story short, this was going to lead to very dramatic increased cost of housing. The big developers with political influence who do out of the states, they were going to get caught with this because they use a lot of R30 zonings. And they pushed back. The minister responded well. I think that was a really gutsy call because doing this with 2 weeks out, it was good to see a politician actually stick their neck out.
I think he does a good job, John Kerry.
Yeah, he seems like a good guy. I haven't met him, but he seems like a good guy.
Everything's up against. He seems to
made
do
some bold moves.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he? Yeah.
And so then all he said at that stage was that it's not happening right now, and they're going to figure out how to integrate it. Now, this was maybe missed a few weeks ago. There was an announcement around granny flats not requiring approval. Easier way to build granny flats. HMO. And see your eyes lighting up.
We're looking at a few blocks already.
What was missed on the same day, and I only found this out because I saw it in the media, and when I see a story in the media, I always go to the government media releases because that has the full story, whereas the media have to cherry picks. Yeah. And sitting there was the announcement that the new planning code was starting on the 1st of March. And long story short, it will apply to group dwellings in those zonings, but it won't apply to single houses. Right. What is a single house? I think the definition's around common property. If there's no common property, then it's a single house. So if it's a green title, no issue. If it's strata, if there's no common property, it's a single house. If there is, it's group dwelling.
So 2 street-facing dwellings with their own driveway
doesn't
apply to?
Yep. And yeah,
One
you
behind the
probably
other.
want to be thinking now about sometimes you put a bit of common property in for power access and so on. I think from now on you just use easements because that can mess it up. So with all that going on, we decided to keep our heads down and step away from development until that form of new build development until the dust settles. And we're keeping our eye on it. This may become another area where there's more intrinsic value than price, because if people aren't buying sites because of this, 6 months time, if we're ready to pivot again, maybe there's your opportunity.
Cool.
Just watch this space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's happening in the market right now then? What are we seeing apart from the biggest shortage of housing we've ever had in the States?
Amazing growth.
I
think last quarter was 5% or something. So annualized, that's a 20% per annum growth. I think Adam was at a conference on the weekend, and the commentators were, I guess, saying something similar. Is that right?
Yeah. There's a guy called Brendan Kelly. He's my property mentor.
Yep.
I think he's
give Brendan a shout out. Where's he from?
Brendan from Results Mentoring.
Yeah.
I've worked with him for 11 years.
He's coached Adam. He taught him everything he knows.
So those are the guys who taught me how to develop.
Yeah.
He is a genius in forecasting macro price movements, and he put it up at the conference. He drew a line of the national median house price movement since COVID to now. He drew his prediction. He drew what happened, and
It's very
he's
close.
spot on.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Uncanny.
And I've talked to him about it, being my coach. I said, coach me, how did you do it? A lot of it comes down to judgment, which is always the case in property. And he's calling Perth 20% growth this year. And what are we seeing on the ground? That's median price. So what we're seeing on the ground is very confident in that as a prediction. In certain areas, if it's 20% on the median, what could that mean? We've already seen this play out in the lower price property under 500,000.
It's gone crazy.
Last year they probably had 30%, 40% growth.
Went mental, didn't it? But properties in Mandurah now, like they've all got sixes in front of them.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Crazy, isn't it?
So think about what this means. The old ripple effect thing. Those areas have jumped up. They were very subdued before COVID. They've caught up. They've exceeded. People who own now have a fair bit of equity. They might have an extra 150,000 in actual dollars. Well, maybe you've lived in Mandurah, but you want to move closer to the city. Now's your time. You can take that money and buy in the next more expensive suburb. We're starting to see that next price tier, the demand is rising. So we expect that that's going to go ballistic, and then it'll flow over into that premium space.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why we're targeting premium areas.
Now.
There is growth there now. There is demand there now, but we sold some properties in East Vic Park that we were thinking we'd get 530,000 for them. We had 10, 11 offers on each, sold them both for 600.
Wow.
So that's happening there. How do you even buy that property? Very, very hard. In the segment we're in, there's still breathing room, but we'll be watching and seeing as the equity builds, buyers will have more money to pay to upgrade. These are premium areas. People love to live in these areas. What happens when interest rates drop?
I was just about to say, it's probably serviceability that's stopping people from buying in them suburbs right now, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a psychological factor too. One thing that always gets forgotten with this discussion, Sydney's median house price, I was in Sydney talking to the Sydney Sider, so it's front of mind.
Yeah.
Their median house price is only like $1.4 million. Ours is about 600. If you actually look at the ABS stats, our average weekly earnings are higher than theirs. So we've got people with money, but paying $2 million for something, $2.5 million
Feels like
a lot when the median house price is 600. So let's see how it plays out when more buyers have. There are definitely some buyers who might not be able to do it, but give them some interest rate cuts, give them a bit more equity. There's more bidders.
It changes the psychology as well, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? When the rate drops down, people all of a sudden
can,
think, right, I'm going to buy now.
Yeah.
Because there's uncertainty in the market until it drops down, right?
Definitely. Yeah. There's also something different about this boom to the ones that we've had in the past, in that it's not completely fueled by mining. That's unusual, you know?
Yeah,
if it is genuinely, what's happened is we just haven't built houses for the last, almost 2 decades, you could say, right? We've had very little supply coming online. And if you have a boom that's demand driven, like because of the inflow from an economic boom, as soon as the economics come off, it kind of self-corrects, and that's what's happened in the past. Whereas in this scenario, to bring new supply to the market, it takes longer, it's harder to do. Do you know what I mean? So it doesn't feel as volatile as what we've been through. Like if you look at 2005 and even to 2014 to an extent, it doesn't feel as violent as that.
Well, 05, 06 was very much a boom driven by similar factors to this. Subdued market from the late 80s, low activity. The Perth's market did not keep up with inflation and other things that happened. And it all came to a head where it was very cheap compared to the intrinsic value. Mining kicked off, economy started, people moved here and off it went. To me, this feels very similar. I was at uni during that boom. I didn't get to trade in it. I've got older sisters. They bought their first homes. They saw them double or triple in like 2 years.
Yeah, I remember those times.
Very, very good for them. I'm not a jealous sibling, but I remember watching that, thinking, "Oh, this would be great." And when it's time for me to buy a few years later, the market had peaked, and we had to just deal with it.
Really pain.
And we had that bubble in 2013-14. Didn't necessarily feel like a bubble at the time, but we know in hindsight that what happened was they're building a lot of mines. So there's a lot of people that had moved here for that.
Yeah.
Once the mines started operating, they needed less people to run them. So people went elsewhere and the population dropped, and then we had a downturn. So I often hear people say, Perth's a country town. It's a boom-bust economy of mining. Mining's very important to our economy, very important to Australia's economy. If you look up the national accounts, there's no denying that. But yes, they're building mines, but nothing like they were before. And the iron ore is trading at something like a 500% gross profit margin. So half the price of iron ore, and those guys are still doing pretty well. So
Exactly.
yeah, we're not. It feels different. It's supply driven. Really, at this stage, we haven't even caught up from. If you took 06, which was the previous peak, ignoring the bubble that we had in 13-14, and you look at inflation and any other markers, we haven't caught up yet. We're just catching up.
We've got a way to go.
So we've got a way to go.
Where's the demand coming from then? Why are all these people all of a sudden in Perth needing housing?
Look, there's been a lot of migration to the country. People have moved here for various reasons. A lot of students. Now, they're not buying properties, but they're soaking up the rental market. We also, pre-COVID, there wasn't a very good argument for a traditional buy and hold investor to buy property. So we saw, traditionally, that segment sits around 30% of demand. They were well under, around 20% for a while. We're well under 30 for a decade. They've been coming back and forth. Started with people from other states, East Coast investors coming in. But what starts to happen now when the people in Perth build up some more equity, properties popping off. Of course you go buy a investment
changes,
property. That's a very important segment. That might start rolling things along. Now we have to watch investor stuff because that is what can lead a bubble. But we've still got a lot of owner occupiers. They're upgrading houses. There's still first time buyers buying houses. People have moved here for work in various different industries. As Angad said, it's demand driven. We've got low supply and high demand. So that's how a market grows organically. That's what you want to see.
Do we see the supply changing in the future, or the demand dropping off? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel for people that are trying to get into the market, or is it just going to be good days for the next 5-10 years for property investors?
I'll be blunt for anyone in that situation because I want to make sure the message drives home. We're at the beginning of something big. It's not going backwards. It is a boom. It's not a bubble at this stage. I think it'll stay that way I could easily see for a couple of years. Now we're going to get 20% per annum growth for a couple of years. That's a very high rate of growth. I'm not sure about that, but as a growing market, we're so short of supply. Our rental market is broken. You can't get rentals. We have to catch up there. We have to build more houses. Remember I said we had projects that were 2 years to 4 years? So we're professionals. We're only delivering our 2022 houses now. So there's 2 years of construction missing. How do we catch up? We got a long way to go. So if you're out of the market, think you're getting in, just get in.
Get in ASAP.
We've had chats with some friends of friends to help them through this. And I know it's hard if you have the memory of Perth and you went through the downturn, you might still be a bit wary of property and false starts, but this isn't a false start. It's all guns blazing, get moving.
Yeah, well, I mean, you just have to look back over the last 12 months to see the growth that they had in 2023 at the lower end of the market. And that was investor driven. A lot of East Coast buyers coming in and buying up in these low price point but high yielding areas like the Rockinghams, the Manjaras, the north in Alkimos and all them types of places. the yield was what was attracting them in, and the low price points as well. But compared to their states now, we've still got a pretty low price point.
We do.
Right? And
We're
because
still
of
well
the,
our yield's popping off. The guys at
that's
Sydney
it,
were
the yield's
asking
going
me,
up, right?
is it 3% now in those areas? Because I was talking about this very thing. Yeah, it's about 4 point something.
It's going up because there's a lack of rental properties there. So
Exactly.
people are paying more, which drives the yield up, which then makes it
Drives
look more
investors,
enticing.
yeah.
I've seen people online saying that Perth's past its Perth's going to come off the boil soon, but when we look at where we were back in 2013, 2014, before we came off the boil for that long, slow downturn, our median house price is kind of where it was back then, wasn't it?
Yes.
So we've kind of just come back to
Just
equal.
gone over it, yeah.
Yeah.
And what other how do we figure this out? You look at a macro trend, which is growth. Then you have to look at the micro areas. So you made a really good point. The low price stuff has already grown a lot. Is that off the boil? Yes or no? How do we figure that out? Supply and demand are two key fundamentals. Number of listings versus number of sales. You go to any of those areas and I can guarantee there's probably 3 sales to every listing still. So I wouldn't say that's off the boil. Turnover, average days on market is about 8 days, median days on market. So we're usually used to 60 days.
I
If
remember
it was
the day,
60
yeah, I was
days,
just about to say,
that's how it used
to be.
affordability. Perth is still one of the most affordable capital cities. I think in Sydney it costs you over 50%. If you look at the median price and the amount it would cost to have a loan and your average income, about 50% of your gross average income goes to servicing the median property.
Crazy that, isn't it?
We're
That's
still
housing stress right there.
That's right. And last time I looked, we were low 30s.
Yeah.
Think when interest rates drop, that stat gets better. So I'm just not seeing anything that indicates we're anywhere near peak. And people don't I'm going to probably know the name for the fallacy, but don't look at things in absolute terms that just because we've gone up 20% in median price in the last year, whatever it is, that we're overboiled. Look at the actual stats, the supply, demand, affordability, all these indicators, and make your own choice. And if you go through and do that for every suburb, you'll see pretty clearly the amount of opportunity. That's why we're sitting here saying couple year boom, because we just see the reality.
You've got to look at the market segmented as well, right? It's not like it operates as one market. The people that are buying apartments in the city are not the same people buying these $3 million renovated houses, right? So just bring some context to that as well. Certain markets will come on and off the boil, and generally the lower markets, at least previously, were the ones that come off the boil first. We haven't started seeing that, but that might be a leading indicator to the stuff that we're doing to tell us, okay, now's the time to start thinking in a year's time that this might not look like this anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I was looking back over historical price growth and price points, right? And before I came to the country in 2010, I think it was 2008, 2009, the median house price in Perth and Sydney was virtually the same, right? And then Sydney just went on this huge run.
Yeah. And we didn't.
Well, I think we went up for like 2 years.
That was our bubble. Yeah,
that was the back end of the bubble when I came here, and I left England after the GFC when everything was going down. I came here and it was like Hollywood. Everyone's still working, everybody's happy, people are buying properties, everything's moving in the right direction. And then we got that slow downfall at the back end. We spoke earlier about replacement value of properties, and we're speaking about investors coming into the state. And if we were to break the market down into low, medium and high price points, you said you're targeting a high price point for your renovations. If we're talking about low, medium and high, what would you put them price points into? And then we've got to think about replacement costs in them suburbs of what it's going to cost to build a house compared to buying a house that's already built and renovated. Makes sense?
It feels to me like before this, the low price point was under 400. Well, those days are gone. It feels like under 500,
maybe even under 600.
we're lucky, and it's moving towards under 600. I'm talking about those villas in Eastwick Park, 3x1 villas, sold for 600. Well, we thought they were going to be low 500s, and they proved us wrong. So, it feels like under 600 is probably where that's heading. It might not be there everywhere yet, but that's also another thing you're thinking about where to buy or invest. Maybe that's an indicator, something for you to ponder.
Well, let's look at Vic Park then. So, replacement cost of that 3x2 villa now, and the land component. What would that cost if you were to buy the land and build?
Oh, look, it was about 250 square metres for the land. That could be worth about 400,000 now as a strata block.
For the land.
Yeah.
Because Vic Park's done really well.
Yeah,
right? This is a nice area of Vic Park.
And then the replacement value for something like that could be about 300,000. So
So
yeah, it was at 80s build.
Because it's
so it wasn't
depreciated as well,
brand
right?
new,
So-
so it's been depreciated. So maybe that explains very clearly how we got, because it was a renovated 80s house, so it used 300, maybe it was 200. Maybe that explains very well how we got 600.
Yeah. Well, are you trying to see how do you identify opportunity in each price point?
Kind
Is that
of,
the-
yeah, but also to see where the opportunities are for building as well. So let's take Mandurah, for instance, in a block of land there compared to a block of land in Victoria Park. If you get 250 square metres in Mandurah, it would probably cost you 250 grand, right?
Yeah.
Cheaper.
Look, I'm very disconnected with Mandurah.
Yeah.
For,
We were
not
getting
because we
for
don't like
low
Mandurah.
100s not
Yes.
that long ago, man. Yeah, I remember those ones that we did in we got three. We last year, just towards the second half of last year, we got 7 blocks essentially under option for another type of strategy, and in those Nolamara areas, which is 10Ks maybe less from the CBD, you were getting 220 square meters for like 150, 160,000. Those today are probably like 220, 230, maybe even up to 250 in some occasions. And then if you look at, we got some in Bentley as well, small blocks, 165, similar price point. Today, probably 250, maybe even more for those types of things. So you are seeing a lot of those blocks go up. The issue is that there's still, I don't feel like people are that keen to build still. Like, I haven't seen that type of demand for people buying land.
Well, numbers are down, aren't there? And we've also got the less builders in the market now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them in the world, isn't there?
Yeah,
So-
and maybe, and this is another thing. Like, people always ask me, "Hey, do you think building costs will go down?" I say they might, but I don't think you'll pay less, right? Because the market, like builders price based on their own supply and demand.
Yeah.
So if they can make an extra margin, they'll do that. They'll only discount your price if they feel someone else is going to do it for less. So just because the build costs go down, which even if they did, it doesn't necessarily flow onto the consumers. Do you know what I mean? So I haven't seen people excited about building. I don't know if you're seeing it. Like it's kind of day to day for us. Maybe you'd know
No.
more.
Well, standard properties, I can't give you any feedback on that because we don't really operate in that space at all.
Yeah.
But HMO, NDIS, yeah, there's definitely appetite there now.
For sure.
So when going back to these 3 different price brackets that we're looking at, it's probably still cheaper to buy an established property than it is to buy land and build an
Oh,
own house.
100%.
there,
Yeah.
100%.
Yep.
When we're looking at the mid-tier, so let's say 600 to a mil, do you still think it's cheaper to buy an established property there or build?
Yeah, so I think it's, to me, if I wanted to buy something right now that I thought of just doing growth, I'd probably be looking in those areas. Growth, the quickest rate of growth, because the land prices are more expensive, but it doesn't feel like it's had that intense demand that the lower prices had. And as I said, my theory is the person who just sold in East Vic Park for 600, if I was a home buyer, I've now got more cash, more equity. I can jump into another area, even in that same area. I could go from a villa to a townhouse. The townhouse might be $1 million, but I've got some equity and I only have to make up 400 now. So yeah, I think that's the segment I'd be watching for that.
The 5 to mil.
But I think
60 mil.
in every market, it's cheaper to buy existing than to build new.
Yeah, so-
That's
Yeah,
actually an
it's still
indicator
there,
of
yeah.
undervalued though.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, there's
that's
no
what I'm trying to see.
there's no market where you could buy land, build a house, and deliver it for cheaper than
Yeah.
a similar
But
existing
but the
product.
minute it becomes similar is the minute that the building industry changes completely, right? Because
Correct.
yeah,
Yeah.
Correct.
yeah,
Yeah.
because
Exactly. Yes.
people
Yeah.
can. No one wants to wait 12 months for a property to be built. There's still a little bit of uncertainty around
Yep.
builders. Some people don't have anywhere to live while they're building. So
Yep.
yeah, fast forward 12 month,
Yeah.
24 month. There's a
Yep.
bit more supply in the market.
Yep. That's possible.
All of a sudden, people are starting to build.
Yep.
And then we see the spike in the construction industry again.
Yeah.
Not as severe as what we've seen before.
But maybe we'll start to see that it is, if people are seeing that it's more economic for you to buy a block and build than it would be to buy something in the area,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting though? It's actually cheaper to buy, I think, even with interest rates, it's cheaper to buy a $550,000 house and land package in Baldivis, Wellard's, one of the cheaper areas, than it would be to rent in those areas, which is wacky, right? So that's actually where a lot of the demand is coming from. It's in that first home buyers market for construction services. I mean, we don't play in that space, so we don't like directly engage with them. But we're seeing like, if people think that construction is in a lull, that's not true. brickies are busy again. Everyone's busy again. Yeah. Have you seen this as well?
Yeah.
So
Actually, the front end to lock up is moving really well, like pre-COVID time now.
Yeah. But those trades. So what happened was after initially at COVID, they got really held up, bottlenecked. Then they got really freed up, and they were like begging for work. And now they're pretty steady and busy again. And that's coming through these investor and first home buyers buying in these new estates because it's cheaper to buy a new house and pay that than it would be to rent, right? 1-bedroom villas in Armidale and Gosnells are renting for almost 350 to 400 a week now.
Compared to what were the renting for previously?
Oh, mate, 250, 200 maybe?
Big price.
Yeah, massive. Like almost double compared to like 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. So what are you guys hearing on the ground for the building industry? I mean, you guys are... With the renovations you're doing, you're using a lot of fixing trades there, right? So are your fixing trades easy to get? Are you having delays with them boys coming to site as well?
Yeah, it's okay. It's not, like I said, it's not like it was before for COVID. And we've got enough volume that we can keep them busy, but we're keeping our volume quite limited now so that we can match that to the trade base. So I'd say for us, it's actually quite manageable now, but it is a balancing act, making sure you don't have too much work on and that you can continually get new trades. If you've got existing trades that you really trust and they're great, those relationships are now starting to pay off. Whereas before, like it was just dollars do the talking, right? When people were just getting paid double for the things. Yeah. So it's definitely manageable now.
Cool. What are you excited about over the next 12 months then, gents? It's
Perth Property Market, man. There's
what about in the business though as well? Like within Perth Property Developers, within the development business, what's making you excited?
Yeah,
about
we're super. Like we've got this renovation strategy has we kind of started. We dipped our toe in actually late 2021 when we bought that unrenovated duplex, and renovated it and sold it. And it was really only after that sold and settled around the middle of last year, they're like, wow, that was a really good deal. When you look at the numbers, because it was smaller than some of our other deals, but the returns were really high.
No, it started last year.
The start of last year was when we sold it?
When it settled.
Right?
Yep.
So that was, you can say, from a year and a half before that is when we did the deal. So this renovation strategy, so we picked up one in March, we picked up one in June, we picked up the church in November, we've got another one under offer now. It feels like this is accelerating, and we are gearing up to basically handle that, which has been, that's been basically our entire focus.
Yep.
Adam's got series of investors who are interested in the Perth market now, so we want to make sure we've got a home for their capital.
Yep.
And then just making sure that we've got the delivery teams lined up to smash out these structural renos, right?
How different is it now raising capital through investors with the market being the way it is compared to the way it was when we first met?
Look, it's interesting. It is different, but it's all relationships as well, isn't it? So we have over 50 investors that work with us. We've got a good network. We've got a track record. The market helps, but it's hard to be objective with it. But when there's a bit of excitement around, I think we wouldn't want to be part of it.
Like, I want to be in. I'm going to go back full circle there because you mentioned you got 50 investors now. Them 50 investors, you haven't just plucked them out with thin air, haven't you? Going back to the very start of the podcast, it all started with the networking events, didn't it?
Yeah.
And
that's right.
taking action, getting out there, meeting people, starting small, taking these small incremental steps. A lot of people always ask me, how do we get started? And my first thing is get out there and meet people.
One step at a time.
Network,
Yep.
Get out there, meet the right people, and you get to the point where you're doing. How many projects have you got on the ground now?
Well, at least 15.
15 projects, 50 investors ready to invest in your projects. It's that's how you get to this point, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
One step at a time.
And also look at the other relationships. We talk about the benefits we have of having this great community, and some is direct in the business, but all the other people you meet, from great relationships like the three of us to just other people Maddie and Tom work next door, some other guys that are part of our network. There's a lot of people around. If you're in a bind or you need some advice, you just pick up the phone and there's a group there to support you.
Gents, I have really enjoyed this conversation. We've been chatting now for an hour and 15.
Oh, wow.
Just flies, isn't it?
Yeah, that was really, really good. So I want to finish on, I like getting people's quotes. Like, what's a quote that you kind of live by when things get tough?
There's one that came to mind earlier when we were talking about the teamwork thing, and it's, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Yeah. So that's been something that's been present for us lately, especially as we're seeing this and we're realizing that, into this partnership, it's been a few years now, been working together, that now it really does feel like we're moving further and further than we probably could alone. So it's been great for us.
Yeah.
I think for me, we're so excited about the market. I was over in Sydney presenting all of this, and there's a quote we put up from Warren Buffett, and it captures it all. It's price is what you pay, value is what you get. So yes, it's hard to buy in this market, but if you think about figuring out where the value is there, but the price is less, all you have to do is offer more than the other guys, and you still make money, and off you go. So yeah, it works well.
I'm going to finish it on my favourite quote, which I used to have my last podcast with, and it kind of ties into the journey that we just spoke about there. And every master was once a disaster, and every winner was once a beginner, right? We all got to start somewhere, right? And when you start off, you definitely don't have 50 investors and 15 projects under your belt at the very start. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure as always, Neil. Thank you very much.
Awesome to catch up. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you can stay up to date with all cash flow positive property updates.